The golden glow of the late afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Cole's corner office, casting long shadows across the polished oak desk. The city below pulsed with life, cars crawling along the avenues and tiny figures bustling on the sidewalks. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, save for the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the air conditioner. Ethan, dressed in a crisp navy suit, leaned back in his leather chair, scanning a stack of documents with practiced efficiency. Years of running a multi-million-dollar empire had made him immune to the flood of correspondence that came his way. Most of it was predictable: business proposals, investment pitches, requests for charity. His assistant stepped in, placing another neat pile of letters and contracts before him. He began flipping through them without much thought, the movements mechanical, his mind already on the evening's board meeting. Then his hand froze. Among the glossy envelopes and professionally printed headers lay a small, wrinkled envelope. The paper was thin, almost fragile, the corners softened from handling. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, and slightly smudged, as if written by someone unaccustomed to writing for long. There was no return address, no company logo, just his name, written with a quiet sincerity that somehow pierced through the noise of his day. Ethan couldn't explain why, but something about that envelope drew him in. It felt out of place in his world of polished deals and pristine presentations, and that made it impossible to ignore. Ethan turned the envelope over in his hands, running his thumb along the faint crease as if the texture itself might reveal its story. Slowly, he slid a letter opener under the flap and unfolded the single sheet of lined paper inside. The handwriting was the same, shaky, deliberate, each letter pressed hard into the paper, leaving faint indents on the back. He began to read. It was from a woman named Margaret Dawson, someone he didn't know. She wrote about a small town far from the glitter of New York, where winters were harsh and opportunities scarce. She explained that she wasn't asking for money for herself, but for the local library, which was about to shut down due to lack of funding. Her words painted a picture of the place: creaky wooden floors, shelves heavy with worn books, the warm scent of paper, and children huddled inside on snowy afternoons, escaping into stories that carried them far beyond the cold streets outside. Margaret wrote about how that library had been her refuge when she was a little girl, giving her hope when life felt hopeless. She spoke of the librarian, Miss Carter, who treated every visitor like family and taught children to dream bigger than their circumstances. Now, with the roof leaking and bills unpaid, the library was days away from closing forever. She didn't beg. She simply asked him to read her words and, if he could, help keep the doors open, for the children who still needed a safe place to dream. By the time Ethan looked up from the page, the noise of the city outside felt a million miles away. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the letter resting loosely in his hands. For years, his world had been measured in quarterly earnings, merger deals, and stock market ticks, a constant race where sentiment rarely had a place. Yet Margaret's words lingered, stirring something he hadn't felt in a long time. He could almost see the faces of those children she described, their small hands clutching worn library books, eyes wide with the kind of wonder no screen could replace. Without realizing it, he found himself remembering his own childhood. His family hadn't been wealthy, far from it. There had been a tiny library down the street, with a cranky old librarian who eventually became his greatest cheerleader. That was where he had discovered his first business book, the one that planted the seed of ambition. He had never thought about it in years, but now the memory hit him hard. He set the letter down and stared out at the sprawling city skyline. In all his years of success, he had donated to causes, yes, but always through a foundation, always through a process. This felt different. This wasn't a generic cause on a spreadsheet. This was a single, heartfelt voice asking for help, not for herself, but for others. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his thoughts. It was his assistant reminding him of a meeting in 5 minutes. Ethan glanced at the letter again, and for the first time in a long while, the meeting didn't feel nearly as important. That evening, long after the rest of the building had emptied, Ethan sat alone in his office with the letter beside him. The city below glittered under the night sky, but his attention was fixed on a glowing search bar on his laptop. He typed in the name of the small town Margaret had mentioned, then the name of the library. The results were sobering: a modest brick building with peeling paint, a faded sign, and a local news article from 3 months ago: Town Library faces closure due to funding cuts. A photo showed children huddled inside, wearing coats indoors because the heating barely worked. The librarian, an elderly woman with warm eyes, stood in the background, her smile barely hiding the strain. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. In the world he operated in, millions of dollars shifted hands with the click of a button, but here, a few thousand could mean the difference between a safe haven for children and a locked, abandoned building. He reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Find me a way to contact Margaret," he said, his voice firm but unusually soft at the edges. "And clear my morning schedule." There was a pause on the other end, as if his assistant was trying to process the request. Ethan rarely got personally involved in anything that wasn't tied to business strategy. But tonight was different. This wasn't just a letter anymore, it was a call he felt deep in his soul, and he intended to answer it. 2 weeks later, the small town's library doors opened to the sound of laughter, music, and the hum of new heaters. The once faded walls were freshly painted, shelves gleamed with rows of brand new books, and a colorful children's corner buzzed with excited little voices. Margaret stood near the entrance, her eyes shimmering as she greeted each visitor. She hadn't expected him to come, but there he was, Ethan Cole, the man whose name she'd only seen in magazines, now wearing a simple sweater instead of a tailored suit. He moved through the crowd with an easy smile, shaking hands, listening to stories, and kneeling to talk to the children at their level. When their eyes finally met, Margaret pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. "You came," she whispered. Ethan's gaze softened. "Your letter reminded me what real wealth looks like," he said quietly. "And it's not in bank accounts or skyscrapers, it's in places like this." The mayor stepped forward, announcing that an anonymous donor had given enough not only to save the library but to expand it. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Ethan caught Margaret's eye again. She knew. As the evening wound down, Ethan stood outside, watching warm light spill from the windows into the cold night. For years, he'd measured success in profits and deals. Tonight, he realized something far greater, that one small act, sparked by a simple letter, could change lives, including his own.